an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for including me in this really important moment. My own question is always the same. What helps people, low income, middle income, high income, to survive and thrive during a shock, during a disaster? What factors, what things in the community, in their lives, give them that strength to bounce back after a major event? And I'll begin with this very quick story about why I care so much. In 2005, my family and I moved down to New Orleans. We had really bad timing. We got there July the 17th, 2005. We had about 6.5 really good weeks in our new home there in Lakeview, which is about a quarter mile south of Lake Pontchartrain. Soon afterwards, Lake Pontchartrain and our house would meet, because on the 28th of August, as you know, with the arrival of Hurricane Katrina, our home and the homes of almost 1 million other people in New Orleans were filled with water, in some cases for up to 2 months. So we had no job, we had no home. My University of Tulane was shut down for over 4.5 months. We were really at a loss. I had this vision of the future, this vision that somehow the state or the market would save us, that either private insurance would come through with a huge check, like one of those Publishers Clearinghouse moments, and it'd say, Daniel, congratulations, here's $1 million, go buy a new house. Or somehow FEMA or SBA or someone would come in a white horse, again with a big pile of cash, and get us back on our feet. I'm sad to tell you that neither actually happened. Our requests to FEMA were rejected, and we didn't have private insurance at the time. So we had neither the market nor the state to support us. What did support our family, what did help us through, were networks, friends, faith-based organizations, individuals who lived nearby and further away. In short, our connections. And it became really my life's mission, if you want to think about it that way, to understand, was our experience getting through Hurricane Katrina an anomaly, a strange thing, or is it normal? What gives survivors of shocks the ability to bounce back? This image behind me is hard to see. But in that free time that I had, Rick Wheel and I, a sociologist, began interviewing other survivors of Hurricane Katrina. We began asking them across the city, how is that recovery going for you? And we mapped every one of their answers onto this space between Lake Pontchartrain to the north and the Mississippi River to the south. Those little green, yellow, and red dots that you see, those are people's answers that we got. One of the strange things we noticed immediately was it wasn't about how much water was in their house that determined how well they survived. The green dots that you see, those are good answers. And they are actually clustered in the very dark blue areas of the map where there is more than 10 feet of water on average. Individuals with in fact, less damage, the yellow and white areas you see in Uptown, in Pontchartrain in the south, those are often red and orange, meaning bad recoveries. It became very obvious. Our survival, our bouncing back, isn't a function of the damage of the event. It's not about how much water is in our house or how many feet of our water destroyed what we lived in. So I began to think through, what then is that factor that drives our recovery? What gives us the chance to bounce back? So the last decade and a half around the world, Japan, India, Israel, North America, I think Wellington, New Zealand most recently, I've argued the following. What gives us the power to bounce back are our connections. And we divide these into horizontal ties we call bonding and bridging, and vertical ties that we call linking. Bonding ties are people that are like us, similar background, ethnicity, race, and religion. But thank goodness we have bridging ties that cross those divides through churches, synagogues, mosques, spaghetti monster meetings, places like this, schools. How do we connect to each other, often through an interest group, through a place that we work? Those are horizontal ties. We also need vertical ties, ties to those in authority and power. We call those linking ties. How do these ties help us during a shock? The very first choice made by any survivor after any kind of event is whether or not to go back to a damaged business or a damaged home and to rebuild. We know the costs of rebuilding are so high, psychological costs, financial costs, opportunity costs. And those costs often force us away from the places that we like, to take exit and to move someplace else. What then draws us back to our homes, draws us back to a damaged business? A sense of belonging, a sense of place, a sense of community. We've found around the world individuals with more of these ties, bonding and bridging, they're the ones who come back whatever the financial, psychological, and opportunity costs that they face. We also know many of the challenges facing survivors of shocks around the world. They can't solve these problems by themselves. They need to work collectively. But we know there are collective action problems. Try getting your PTA together on a typical Tuesday night. See how many people show up at those events. So to bring people together at a time of crisis is even harder. We need to have those kind of ties, a feeling of belonging, a feeling of trust and reciprocity. When we have those ties in place, we can make collective action much more easy for a community or for a resident. And finally, while we hope that most of us would have private insurance, which we didn't in our case, and maybe your own survivors that you talk to don't have it either, we hope they have private insurance. They also need what we call informal insurance. Informal insurance is the ability to draw back on the resources of the neighborhood, of the community, of faith-based groups, of people nearby. It gives us information, it gives us hope, it gives us a chance to work together. You can only have this kind of informal insurance and mutual aid if you built those ties before the shock. You don't want to knock on someone's door after an event and say, "Hi, I'm Daniel. Can I stay at your house the next 16 weeks as my house is being fixed?" You need to build those ties beforehand. If this all feels too abstract, I want to spend just 5 minutes or so telling you about the data that we have from one of the most powerful sets of disasters in recent human history, the triple disasters in Japan of March the 11th, 2011. A 9.0 earthquake, 60-foot tsunami, followed by a nuclear meltdown. Imagine New York facing all three simultaneously. 3 Mile Island had nothing on this event. So the image behind me actually is kind of misleading. It looks like the sea is coming over the edge of a bathtub bowl. That's a 35-foot seawall, in fact, that the water is pouring over. And that tsunami killed more than 18,400 people in Japan, the best engineered society in the world. If Japan faced this kind of casualties, what will happen to us in North America with far less engineering, far fewer engineers, and far less mitigation? The interesting thing that we noticed was the following. Of those 18,400 victims, we at first believed perhaps their casualty rates, the number of individuals who were killed, would be a function of the power of the event, how tall that tsunami was when it came ashore. So we simply mapped every village along the coast of Japan and how high the casualty rates were. Interestingly enough, it wasn't the power of the event that predicted how many individuals perished in each community. You can see behind me some strange examples of very short tsunami, but very, very high casualty rates, as high as 10% in some communities. What then drove this process of surviving a major shock? We envisioned 5 different possible answers. The most obvious being how big that shock is, which we immediately dismissed as not being accurate. Perhaps politics could play a role. Can you imagine the party in power drawing resources away from communities around the state that haven't supported it over time? Of course, not here in America, but we thought perhaps that might explain in Japan what we might see. Another theory we had was physical infrastructure. Are there seawalls? Are there berms? How much concrete is in place between us and the hazard? It's a very common one among engineers. We had 2 other arguments as well that we tried out. What about demographics? What if survival and recovery are a function of how old you are? And what if survival and recovery are in fact a function of how tied in you are and how cohesive your community was? In fact, of all of these explanations that we tested, the best explanation of surviving a shock of this magnitude, the most powerful tsunami in the last 100 years, was social cohesion. The more socially connected communities saved more lives, and here's why. Between the arrival of the tsunami and the earthquake before it were about 40 minutes. In that 40 minutes, healthy, able-bodied individuals could get up and walk from homes and businesses and schools to higher ground and be safe when the tsunami arrived. But the elderly, the infirm, those in wheelchairs and hospital beds, they couldn't do it by themselves. The only way they would survive would be if the community knew who they were and went and knocked on their doors, put them on their shoulders in their cars and bicycles, and got them to higher ground. Here, survival wasn't a function of being wealthy or having insurance or even being someone who knew the disaster was coming. It was a function of cohesion. Did your community work together collectively when that tsunami was on the way? Then we began to look at recovery. What drives the recovery processes in these devastated communities? This image of Ishinomaki on the left was taken 2 weeks after that tsunami. On the right, it was about a year and a half later. It looks like it recovered. It looks like the debris is gone. The businesses are open. But we don't see any foot traffic there. There's no one walking around. There are no children playing there. We took images as well in Tagajo, outside Watari in Sendai, at 1 month, 1 year, and 2 years. The debris is gone. That white van being there, I've got a theory about insurance fraud, but over time we see, right, that process of recovery is taking place. But what is recovery for a community? Is it kids being back in school? Is it real estate being available again for rent? Is it infrastructure being operating? Is it businesses being up and running? We measured 14 different types of recovery over time. Can you guess what factor drove the process of recovery? Keep community cohesion. Here's vertical ties. Where those horizontal ties helped us survive the shock, we needed vertical ties to bring in resources, community, companies, and aid from above. There we needed vertical ties, ties between the local community and those in power over time. Survival is a function of horizontal ties. Rebuilding is a function of vertical ties. And finally, we studied long-term mental health. How do individuals rebuild their sense of normalcy after a radioactive contamination event like Fukushima? 140,000 people had to leave their homes, sometimes within 2 hours of getting the notice. 2 hours to pack up your whole house to a small bag and leave, perhaps forever. What would give you a sense of normalcy in the 10 years since you left your home? In some cases, paying a double mortgage on your new home and your old one, as you lost your job, as you lost your sense of place? We measured a number of different ways of mental health recovery in these survivors using what's called the Kessler-6 or K6 metrics. And we found individuals from these communities had far worse mental health. That is to say, more anxiety, more sleepless nights, more PTSD symptoms. What factor helped them, do you think, feel normal again? Social ties. The best recovery didn't come from income or insurance or health. We tried all those explanations. The best explanation came from being connected in your community, a sense of place, a sense of belonging. So my lab at Northeastern uses this argument about social ties as the basis for all the work that we do. If horizontal and vertical ties drive our survival and recovery processes, what can we do then in our communities, in our law firms, in our VOEDs and our COEDs? We can build social ties. So we have 5 different types of programs that we use, ranging from Mr. Rogers up there, all the way to community currencies. We found it's possible to build social cohesion in the same way that we build human capital through education and financial education through processes in schools. It's possible to build up a sense of connectedness and trust and reciprocity with these kind of programs over time. In fact, one of our experiments called Ibasho, which in Japanese means my place, was so successful in Japan. With the over 65 crowd, we now have smaller processes in the Philippines and Nepal that also have very positive results. So if you take away any message from our argument today, it's the following. We often envision recovery as a function of the market or the state. Did the survivor have insurance? Or perhaps, did they have aid from the government? What will help them, though, are ties to organizations like the LSC, ties to each other, ties to voluntary organizations, to churches, synagogues, and mosques. What will help them build their community will not be just wealth or insurance. It will be ties to each other and a social infrastructure where they live. Thank you very much.